So we haven't spoken just yet about the cascading nature of style sheets. Obviously CSS stands for cascading style sheets, but how exactly does this work in terms of writing CSS and applying it to your document? Well, let's take a look at creating a couple of elements here. I'm just going to give these classes. I'll give this one a class of box, and in fact I'll duplicate this down. So here I'm going to say box 1, and down here we'll say box 2. So let's create a selector. As we already know, we have a class selector for our box, and let's give this a width of 100 pixels, a height of 100 pixels, and let's give this a background as well, just so we can see it a little bit easier. I guess we'll change the foreground color while we're here. So this is what we're going to have. There we go, we've got 2 boxes. Now, obviously what I could do is I could say box and create an entirely new selector, but with the same selector, so we're basically mimicking this selector, and I could then say width 200 pixels. Now have a guess what you think this is going to do. Because what happens is the style sheet is read from the top down. Any styles that come after a style you've already applied to a specific selector will be overwritten. So let's take a look at how this works. There we go. So it's basically overwritten that style. If I was to put a completely different CSS property in here, for example padding, it would do pretty much the same thing. We don't have a padding property in here already, but that's going to do the same thing, and it's going to apply the padding in there for us. Now, there's something in CSS which you should avoid if possible, and there are some circumstances where you can use it, but there's something called the important flag. Now what this will do is, if for example down here the width was 100 pixels, no, I'm going to say 200 pixels. Let's say that for example you were loading in an external style sheet that you didn't have control over. So maybe from a plugin that's hosted somewhere. I mean, it's highly unlikely that you would do that. But let's just say you had some CSS that wasn't yours that you were loading in, you couldn't change. And we're going to assume that this is that style. So for example, if I want to change the width of the box, I would have to do it with my own styles. Now, if you get things in the wrong order, what's going to happen is your styles aren't going to take effect. So for example, let's take this here, let's create a new style sheet. So let's call this, I don't know, box.css, and let's paste this in here. Head over to index and let's create a new link to this style sheet. And we'll say CSS box.css. So what's happening now is these styles are still being taken into account. This width of 200 is still being taken into account because this style sheet has been loaded in after the other one. But what happens if we load this style sheet in before the other one? Well, what's going to happen is the browser is going to say, well, this box should be a width of 200 pixels. And now, because this is loaded in after that, it's going to work the same way. The cascading doesn't just happen within a single file, it will happen within all of the styles that are loaded in. So what's then going to happen is, as well as these other properties being applied, it's also going to override this width. So you see that it returns back to 100 pixels width. Now let's just say we wanted this, which was positioned up here, and this is a very, very unlikely example. If this is the case, you will be doing something wrong. Let's say you have this box here and you desperately want to change the size of this, but obviously at the moment, because it's cascading down, it's not going to make a difference. What we can do is use something called the important flag. And if this is overused, you definitely have the specificity of your styles incorrect. So all this will do is it will say this style here should take over any style that we create, whether it's below or above. So now we see that this does actually take a width of 200 pixels, but this isn't great because it just basically means that you are overriding a style that's already been created, which you may already have control over, or if you don't, it should come after. There's nothing necessarily wrong with loading in a style sheet, perhaps for something like a CSS framework, and then overriding the styles yourself. Of course, it does create additional styles, but it's a lot better than using important, because then it's just really, really difficult to maintain. So let's get rid of this box example. So we've got the box here, that's overriding things. But what happens with multiple classes? So for example, we've already sort of seen this in the button example, but we'll go over it again. Let's say we had box 2. I'm just going to write this as an example. So box 2. Okay, so box 2 is going to have a background color of blue. And here I'll just change this property to background color. So we've got a slate grey and a blue. So here I'm going to say box 2. So you'll probably guess that that will change the background. Now what happens if I was to, for example, say box 2, background blue? It works exactly the same. But what if we had up here box 2, background color green, and then somehow we wanted to override the box 2 class, like so. So, let's do box 2. So basically all we're saying is we're styling the box and the box 2 with a background color of green, and they both turn green. We'd expect this because we're overwriting this style from here, and then we're specifying that the box 2 must have a background color of green. So now in this case, what happens if I want to change the box 2 to a background color of something else? Well, I can say box 2, and I'm going to say background color red. And let's have a look what happens. Nothing happens. So why is this not now changing? In sort of looking at this from a very simplistic point of view, we've got a class here called box-2. This is targeting a class called box-2. So why is this not taking effect? Now the reason being is that this selector here is setting the styles .box.box2. So an element with a class of box and a class of box2. Whereas this is only targeting a class of box 2. So what we're doing is we're not overriding this style at all, because this selector is what determines how it's overridden. If we were to copy this and paste it in there, then that would change it, because we are using the exact same selector. So that's how you should be sort of really careful. And if your styles, if you're trying to override styles, which you shouldn't really be doing, if they're not working, then that's most likely the issue. But that's basically just a quick interlude at looking at the cascading nature of style sheets.